Değerli konuklar, sevgili izleyiciler,
Dear audience,
İletişiminin Dijital Dönüşümünde Sorumluluk ve Sürdürülebilirlik konusunu ele alacağımız
welcome to our event, which is entitled Responsibility and Sustainability in the Digital Transformation of Marketing Communication. We think that this is an important item because marketing communication has come to the forefront as an important theme, but the impact of its impact on digital transformation has been experienced for years. When we look at the industries where marketing is in touch, the digitalization winds are really severe, meaning different transformations are taking place with different dynamics. And just like in every transformation, we see positive things coming to the forefront, whereas we also see others awaiting resolutions. So in the digitalization of the marketing communication, we look at how much more value we can elicit and how we can resolve the pending issues and what sorts of steps we need to take. We will address all these issues during this event together with you. Before delving into the details of our schedule, I would like to share and underline a few points. Today we have very prominent guests. We have valuable colleagues, friends. Therefore, if you have any questions about this theme, please do send them on the right-hand side. If you're using a mobile interface, it will be on the bottom. So please make use of the Q&A session. Also, we have two international guests, and we're going to provide simultaneous interpreting during their speeches, and you're going to see TR and EN on your menu. Please click on the option so that you can listen to the event in the relevant language. Without further ado, I would like to invite our first guest, who is a member of Global Alliance, my apologies, who is a member of the digital marketing platform, Alkan Eraltan. The floor is yours. Thank you very much, Mr. Dear Serdar. Dear guests, we're going to look at brand and security, while Chris and Rob wait in the digital lobby. Melis and myself will refer to the basic concepts of marketing communication. But first, I would like to start by thanking Harvard Business Review team, starting with Serdar, because we're talking about an imminent threat which should be paid attention to by the business world. Therefore, I would like to thank them for bringing it to your attention. As you know, the online channels are gaining more share in the marketing industry, and here we see productivity, ROI, targeting, and also measurability as the main criteria or factors. However, in addition to this bright side of concepts, we see the dark side of the medal, where we see users with bad intention or bad use scenarios. In digital transformations, these users with malintentions appear with troll accounts, multi-accounts, or fraudulent accounts, and cause us to look at fraudulent activities or financial activities, and also make us deal with hate speech. Of course, we've been dealing with such concepts for years in terms of brands, consumers, or NGOs. While doing so, for the last 7-8 years, as a person elaborating on these concepts, I can say that individual efforts are not enough, and that we don't have strong muscles when we talk about these concepts. So here comes the metaphor of Voltran. Voltran was a cartoon character which was followed fondly by our generation, referring to a synergy, and the World Federation of Advertisers would refer to GARM in the last quarter of 2019 as an initiative whereby all the advertising platforms, not just advertisers, NGOs would come together and look at awareness and other issues. This was an umbrella initiative. I think we are going to make use of the fruits of these benefits, make benefit of these efforts. What matters here is the localization of these studies. Therefore, I think Mr. Serdar will make certain explanations. Well, you said Voltron, which gave away our age, dear Alkan. It is a very nice analogy, metaphor. Thank you for your invaluable insights and thanks for this introduction. No, thank you, Serdar. Now, as Alkan referred to Melis, I will refer to Melis now, who is the Regional Director of Turkey and Mina of MMA. Welcome, Melis. Hi, thank you. Thank you very much. As Alkan stated, and dear Serdar underlined, Voltron was a nice analogy in this digital ecosystem. The system is subject to fraudulent activities, the protection of ID information, so we need to address many topics. That's why last year the Association of Advertisers, World Federation of Advertisers, MMA, came together for this digital marketing communication platform. And here they wanted to refer to the problems in the digital ecosystem and also pay attention to the global problems so that they can create local problems. At this point, digital concepts and security issues can be discussed with the introductions, remarks from Serdar. Thank you very much for your kind introductions. They were short introductions, though, and you said the ball is at your court. Then we will proceed to the panel for efficient use of time. Thank you very much, dear Melis. Now, we are referring to the panel part of this event, dear audience, and I will switch to English with your kind understanding. If you want to listen to the event in Turkish, though, you can click on the Turkish button or stay in English. This will channel now become English. So if you want to continue in Turkish, please click.
This is our panel session. As our previous speakers mentioned, digital environment is growing at a tremendous pace. And with this tremendous growth, there comes a lot of opportunities for consumers, for media industry, and for society at all. However, like any other high-growing environment, digital is also open to many glitches, something like fraud, misuse, or manipulation. Alkan already mentioned a lot of these misuses. And as citizens of the post-truth era, if I may say, we are all subject to those kind of misinformation, and it is very crucial for all stakeholders to create a seamless collaboration in order to develop, maintain, and sustain an environment which protects us all. Issues like brand safety, standardization, and platform approach is becoming crucial day by day. So I think this is the raison d'etre for Global Alliance for Responsible Media, GARM in short. Today, I have two distinguished guests who are so much into these issues and are at a position to give us a really broad perspective about where industry is heading and what kind of approaches should we take in order to create this healthy and value-added environment. Without further ado, I would like to open the floor for discussion, and I would like to invite our panelists. Rob Rakowitz is the initiative lead for GARM. Rob, welcome to the panel.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure, Rob. And Chris Babayode is the managing director of the MMA in EMEA region. Chris, welcome to the panel.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
All right, guys, let's start with you, Rob. As we have already talked about the huge transformation, let's dig down a little bit into this. How do you see the transformation of internet advertising? As conventional media is subject to change, how should the mindset of advertisers change as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So I think that what we've seen is that the industry has gone over from a place where you were buying directly from sites as well as platforms, and then you went over to a place where we were starting to buy audiences, and you weren't really concerned about the placement of where the ad was. And you were basically doing audience buys. And what that ended up doing was creating a bit of a liability for a lot of advertisers and the platforms themselves, where there's not been a clear understanding of context for advertising. So what we've actually seen now is that there's a coming back, and you have to think about this as pendulum swinging. Buying direct content, buying audiences only, and sort of like at expense of those two things, now to a point where it's coming back into the middle, where the where you reach people, where you reach them in terms of content is becoming important too. And I think that's come about by what we've seen as a steady drumbeat in the idea of brand safety, where originally, I think when this first sort of hit the front page news was in 2017 with the headline of big brands fund terror with ISIS militants using YouTube to siphon legitimate advertising funds off of YouTube and being able to use that off of real world harm. It's obviously migrated since then, and I think that obviously you've seen sort of the business model and algorithms for engagement build up without a clear context for content. To answer the question, I think that the big thing that we've seen here is that the industry has shifted over to an attention on the content, not just the platforms themselves, as a means of engagement as well as advertising. So I think that's probably what we're looking at right now. And I think that the way forward is giving advertisers, platforms, and the agencies a clear system to understand the nature of content that is driving the reach, as well as the engagement and the advertising. And that level of transparency and control is what we're actively working on.
All right. As you have mentioned, now it is shifting more to content, Rob, and also as Alkan and Melis mentioned, there are also a couple of threats going through. So there is a hard equation to solve. We are facing with a hard equation to solve. So looking at the big picture in the internet advertising domain, how holistically are stakeholders capable and aware of the dynamics and the threats? What are some areas of improvements, according to your opinion?
Yeah, so in terms of areas for improvement, I think it's clarity in terms of what is truly harmful. So I think that the first thing that you have to do is be able to define what the issue is. If we don't have a clear understanding amongst advertisers and amongst platforms at a global level, what is harmful, and you can't agree on the nomenclature there, the actual sort of the words, then you're really not going to be able to tackle the issue. So the first thing is being clear on definitions and categories. The next thing is making sure that you are measuring things, that you're measuring that dynamic consistently. So is there a process in place that you can actually say, okay, well, if this is harmful content, this is how we measure it. And if those two things are actually connected, then you start to actually bring things forward the right way. So the idea of definitions and then a measurement being the sort of two things that are critical. The third thing that you would want underneath there is adjacency controls. So if you can agree what's harmful content, if you can agree what's the right measurement, and then the third thing is if you can agree to create the tools to determine where ads show up online, either from an advertiser perspective and or a consumer perspective, then that's a third thing that is really important. So being able to have that control and being able to say, listen, if I'm a brand and I care very much about, environmental sustainability, making sure that I can steer clear of content that would challenge things like climate change denial, that is going to be critical. And then I would say that the fourth thing that's really important is independent oversight and verification, because it's really important to say, okay, I've got the definitions, I've got the measurement, I've got the systems to allow advertisers to have control. Well, the final thing that you need is independent verification to make sure that all of those three things work together. So it's about creating this, in essence, a flywheel, a closed loop, to make sure that all of the four things that you need are done the right way. So make sure that you can talk about harmful content at a global level the right way in different categories. Making sure that you actually measure it. The third thing, making sure that you have control over where those ads are placed. And the fourth thing is making sure that you have an independent reference point to make sure that those three things are working.
Great, thank you very much, Rob. Now I'm switching to Chris. Chris, as Rob mentioned, brand safety is becoming very, very important in this era of misinformation, if I may say. Just let's tap in the brand safety context a little bit. Well, how do you define the brand safety context and why it is important for marketers and consumers?
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to answer this and sort of later questions really from the perspective of the brand marketer, given that's the focus of our association in terms of pioneering modern marketers. And we've done a lot of work with a number of them around the world. And we've come to the conclusion at the MMA that we define brand safety as really referring to controls, the best practices, the techniques and tactics even that brand marketers use to protect their reputation and maintain trust amongst consumers. And this is when their ad appears adjacent to specific types of content. For example, extreme, provocative, hate-filled, and the like. And we've seen some research that shows how much of an issue, a direct threat this is to marketers, and therefore that's why it's important. I'll just highlight too, the CMO Council research indicated that half of consumers, 50%, would walk away from brands if their ads appeared adjacent to inappropriate digital content and content that doesn't align with their values. And a double verified poll, that actually showed that 90% of consumers feel brands are responsible for ensuring appropriate adjacencies. And 2/3 would likely stop using a brand's product if it was viewed against sort of false or inflammatory content. So, marketers are investing in, I think, as Rob said, audience targeting, automated programmatic media buying, and all of this is increasing their vulnerability and potentially lessening their return on investment, and therefore that's why it's important. User-generated media, automated ad placements, audience-based media buying, social media, the use of machine learning and AI and evolving technologies. These are things that have actually contributed, let's say, to the rise and focus of brand safety as an issue, and they really need to be dealt with and reckoned with. And it's not just the marketers as well. I mean, it becomes important that they, as marketers, have a brand safety strategy in place that they can run throughout their organization, and not just as a one-off. It's about refining, evolving it, adjusting it, and the like. And ultimately, if you can think about it, if the whole association, so the whole organization, the whole company could be active in this area or proactive, rather than just running around like headless chickens when they get the 3 o'clock in the morning call from their CEO or CMO, then they've got a greater chance of remaining safe, enhancing and keeping safe their brand reputation. And the latter part you asked me there, the importance to consumers, well, this is all around the issue of trust. I mean, it's trust. And we want our digital ecosystem, our advertising ecosystem, to be trusted by consumers, to be transparent, and that's why it's important to consumers. And I'll say some more about the consumer aspect a little later in the discussion.
Chris, as you have mentioned, trust and transparency becomes the buzzwords during this COVID era, and I think it is going to become more and more important as we have been seeing a huge decrease in trust to organization and trust to content. But besides that, brand safety is a very broad context, but also it's a shared responsibility. It's not a thing that should be loaded on the shoulders of marketers only. But marketers are playing a really central role in order to create awareness and create a synergy within the organization. So how do marketers work with internal and external stakeholders to ensure that their strategy is fully understood and implemented by the other stakeholders?
Yeah, great question. We did a lot of work around this. I mean, ultimately, we do believe that the lead should come from the marketers, but there are a number of steps around this. So first off, it's vital to identify and understand the roles and the responsibilities of internal and external stakeholders. As you said, it's a joint responsibility. Identifying those and understanding who's responsible for brand safety within their organization. And the simplest approach is to start with the internal stakeholders. Yeah, identify the individuals, the teams who should be responsible for, maybe engaged with, and in fact, who should be consulted around brand safety. And therefore, not just identifying them, but really in creating clear lines of accountability. And actually, I think this list of the internal stakeholders is much, much longer than people would maybe realize, because a lot of it might be deemed to sit, say, with the media team, but actually the C-suite, CEO, CMO, CFO, the leadership teams, legal teams, data analytics, social media, PR, compliance, corporate comms. I could go on. But once you're clear on the internal stakeholders, it's important then that you have external partners and experts and consultants and other suppliers to your business. So it's important that they are fully engaged with what you're trying to do around your brand safety strategy. So as has been mentioned, that would include agencies, actually trade associations like ourselves would be in that, publishers, ad networks, ad tech, martech, and as I said, consultants. So there's this process between internal and external, but I think actually overarching to that, what we would recommend from the MMA is there's a dedicated senior executive as the sort of chief brand safety officer. So then this helps establish ultimate responsibility, and they can define which stakeholders are involved and the roles that they'll play. And it's not advisable to completely outsource brand safety to an agency or a third party. As I said earlier, I think marketers really must take the lead. And then over and above that, whilst there's operating and a governance model, let's say, to organize bringing the groups together, this is easier to do when you've got a lead, a chief brand safety officer, as I said. But a further thought I just briefly would like to add in that once you pull the resources together internally, you have the relationships with your third parties and agencies and everything else, it's really important that there is a sort of securing of budget for costs, because this is going to cost the organization some money. They're going to get a return on that investment by avoiding, where possible, brand safety incidents, but that becomes hugely important. As does one other issue, is that defining what is unsafe content within their organization, and in fact, what's the sort of tolerance that they would have for content, politics, gun violence, social issues, even some sorts of news. Because actually, you could say that low risk content and safety is where content is maybe being sort of scientific or educational, warning against doing certain types of behaviors, and actually being side by side with that is very different to being in near sort of high risk content, which is where something illegal or something is being glamorized, is insensitive, gratuitous, and the like. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a great sense of how we would encourage people to bring internal and external stakeholders together, share the responsibility, but have a chief brand safety officer where possible.
Thank you, Chris. I really like the idea of chief brand safety officer. Actually, as Harvard Business Review, we are not in favor of bringing more and more C-level roles to the execution table, but this topic is so crucial and so vital that I think there has to be a coordinator in the C-level who will be dealing with those kind of issues and doing this coordination. And another aspect of the coordination is GARM itself, I think, Ralph. Just tell us about GARM. What is the need for such an organization, and what does GARM aim?
Yeah, absolutely. So we started GARM. We officially launched in June of 2019, and The reason that we started GARM was because the issue of brand safety and suitability was never really addressed the right way. That we've seen continual issues within the industry, that it was being resolved marketer by marketer, platform by platform, market by market, which was not sustainable. We started to mobilize and get this idea that it needed to be multiple marketers coming forward, that it couldn't just be on the sort of shoulders of a media leader, but needed to have the appropriate resourcing to bring the agencies in, to also bring the platforms in, to actively create solutions to resolve the issues. Because if you looked at it, it's very easy to look at the industry and be able to say that it's that there are a lot of problems. It would be harder, in essence, to mobilize and marshal the resources required to solve them, which is why we started GARM in 2019 in June. And we started out with 16 brands. We're now up to 57. We have all of the 6 major agency holding companies, and we now have 11 media platforms and that we've grown from an initial set of 5. So we started out, and then we also have industry associations in part of it, MMA being one of them, to help us build this at the global level and start to be able to drive the right tools. Because, you know, to Chris's point, it's critical that you have a multidisciplinary approach. It's critical that you have the right controls in place. But if there is not consistency in the controls, then you're actually not really able to move the industry forward. So what we're designed to do is help to focus the industry in on the problem, help to drive the tools, and then be able to drive a sensibility of how effective are those tools. Our goal is to make sure that we protect the industry from bad actors and harmful content, to drive industry sustainability, and then also societal safety, because we know that offline content that's harmful can actually lead to real world harms. The idea was, it was probably a little bit outlandish for its time, because we started this, I want to say, in the winter months of 2018, and it really took tragic incidents like Christchurch, as well as a pedophilia network being uncovered on YouTube, to help marketers step up, as well as the platforms, to say that we needed to do things differently, and that business as usual and treating it almost in silos was not going to be what it would take to actually drive things in a positive direction. Since then, we've been happy. We've been able to produce a set of solutions. We first and foremost is those common definitions that have been critical, and we're at the stage now where we will be deploying a series of other solutions later on this year that get into definitions as well as controls, and then independent verification is something that we've seen positive momentum on in the industry. So we're quite pleased and humbled by the change that we've been able to drive, but we know that there's a lot more room for improvement within the industry.
Rob, I think that's a very crucial point, because as a media outlet and as an outlet that is focusing on high quality content, we really suffer from the misuse of content, as well as the inappropriate applications of advertising. So this is a really point that touches to us as well. But you have already mentioned the main focus areas for GARM, but I think these are really crucial verticals. Can you just elaborate a little bit on those focus areas? Can you just dig down a little bit on these main focus areas of GARM?
Sure, absolutely. So the things that we're focused in on, so those common set of definitions and making sure that there is a clear understanding of what is harmful and updating that. So being able to sort of give the industry the transparency and being able to say, okay, this is content that would naturally fall into a topic like death, injury, and military conflict, or this is misinformation, and being able to have the platforms agree that, the advertisers agree that, the agencies agree, and then being able to have the independent verification companies then be able to work with those definitions in a way that's consistent. So that is work that is live and continues to progress. So real solutions that are able to almost put a label on content. And this is going to become extremely important in the UGC environment, because obviously digital publishing and sort of HBR, being able to publish something that's a known article, you know what you're being able to publish. Now the live sort of, people actually being able to produce UGC content in a live fashion and being able to have AI read that and be able to develop a label for it that's consistent. That's been hard work, and that's been hard work that we've been able to drive with our partners, been able to deploy it with the IAB Tech Lab, and then which has given us the global scale to actually drive that forward. So that's sort of, a big tangible element on it. On measurement, we will be deploying very shortly an aggregated measurement report, which is going to be able to sort of report on each of the platforms that are involved in GARM, on the safety of their platform for consumers, the safety of the platform for advertisers, how effective are they in driving their safety policy, and then how good are they in terms of responding to errors. So that is an aggregated measurement report that is going to be coming out. There's going to be working with the 11 categories that we've defined for harmful content. The third thing on adjacency controls, what we are involved in right now is working with all of the platforms and the agencies to define what is a standard for adjacency in each of the different media formats. So there would be one for streaming video, there would be one for newsfeed. That would allow us to then say, okay, what is the right level of spacing that an advertiser should have control over? Because then that gives you the sort of means in saying like, okay, well, if I am a CPG brand or I'm a travel brand, or even if I'm a public outlet or a video game publisher, I actually have the controls to then determine where my ads show up. So let's just make it up. If you are advertising Call of Duty, the video game, you actually have the right placement distances, and you would have the right control of how you would appear next to news around military conflict. So giving brands actually the choice to drive the strategy that Chris is talking about, and giving them the tools to do that. That's the sort of critical thing, and that's something that we are going to be defining the standard mid-year this year, and then we're seeing platforms being able to plug that into their systems in the second half of the year. The fourth final area in terms of like the audits and the oversight that we've been talking about, that's an ongoing conversation. You've been able to see most recently YouTube is exited their brand safety controls as well as their integrations audits. We see Facebook is underway. We've seen Twitter pledge around their process on audits, and these are all things that we're seeing positive momentum on. So real world impact and solutions that we're seeing go into the marketplace that are going to give brands the right solutions that they need to drive appropriate investment. Because I think the big thing here is we've created a standard, a floor, and saying, look, below this is not right for advertising. Above this is where you should have controls. And that is exactly sort of the value and the benefit that we're bringing to the marketplace, is we give brands back the right to determine where their ads show up, which then in essence allows them to approach the marketplace in a way that is safe, sustainable, not just for the brand, but also for the consumer, and also importantly for the platforms in the industry themselves. So this is really about making sure that we have a win for the brand, a win for the consumer, and a win for the industry.
Rob, it's really striking to hear that still GARM is trying to give advertisers the chance to define where their ads will be appearing. So this seems to be a very basic need for an advertiser, but still we are struggling to find a solution for that. And I really like your example of Call of Duty kind of advertising, as I noticed the Stormtrooper helmet in your background, and also I just see a small portion of the R2D2 robot there. I was expecting an example of Fallen Order or Battlefront of Star Wars video games, but Call of Duty will work as well. Thank you very much, Rob. Now I'm switching to Chris. Chris, as Rob mentioned, we have been seeing a big picture. There are lots of things, lots of elements, from crisis management to governance to performance management. So how best do marketers, their vendors, and their agencies plan a strategy, manage and govern the whole subject of brand safety?
Okay, well, first off, I think I've got to identify my background. It's actually a picture, if you can see it there, of an elephant. So I don't know how I'm going to quite bring that one into the answer, but I'll see where I go. But yeah, so the question around governance and everything else, a bit like Rob there. I mean, at the MMA, we've identified a number of recommendations within an MMA brand safety strategy guide for marketers, which we'll publish shortly. And this helps very much on this particular topic, because this governance issue and bringing everybody together, I mean, it really starts with having governance, and performance management actually in place, then having a plan, then being clear on what happens when there is an incident. Yeah, and maybe our definition of an incident is not necessarily a crisis. So if the incident can be resolved without turning into a crisis, then actually, your brand safety, brand reputation is going to be in a better place. So it starts with that. And here's a thing that we found, and I'm sure people listening in and watching in will also have found, is that companies and teams have KPIs, and there's processes in place to measure their marketing effectiveness. But you also need that those in place for your brand safety strategy. If, as mentioned before, if you're establishing a performance management system and tools for ongoing oversight and monitoring, yeah, then that's great. But understanding stakeholder responsibilities, best practices for your agencies and your partners, making sure everybody is aware who's accountable, and that ongoing performance, maintenance, governance is actually in place. That becomes hugely important, because what the real goal and the way to be, I suppose, successful is having this stakeholder group fully appraised and contributing to the brand safety strategy, doing some scenario planning or wargaming. What is appropriate, what isn't appropriate, what would we do if this were to happen, so that when there is, say, a brand safety breach, and everybody understands what a breach is or an incident, then all the stakeholders are not only informed, but they're able to swing into action and put the plan in place, manage communication internally, externally, especially, and then investigate what happens, and then say, okay, so what did we learn from that? So in future, we'll need to add this to the plan, or think about something else somewhat differently. And another, in terms of answering this, and again, giving a recommendation, prepare for an incident before it hits. Yeah, you won't get everyone right, but knowing if this happens, this is what we do. I think Rob mentioned there are different categories, different ways of which brands safety incidents can happen. They're pretty much inevitable, and as I said earlier, the goal is to keep an incident to an incident, not to a crisis. Things that can happen that you could war game, for example, is if there's tragic events in the news, there's cultural bias around, religious political extremism. I mean, there could be a verbal sort of misstep or a word or something by a company spokesman. All of these sort of things should be sort of reviewed, and, as I say, a plan put in place. From a media, from a marketing standpoint, the concern is that when your ad appears alongside inappropriate content, the perception is it's your brand and your company that are associated with it. And we're in an age now rightly so, where some special interest groups really want to call out brands who are maybe not aligning their brand responsibility or their brand with the sort of the values of their company, and their actions aren't tying in, and that could easily spark sort of an incident. And I think final couple of points, if you determine, you know, what's a valid incident, move on, put the strategy in place, you have autonomy, you have decisions in place, you have your external partners and stakeholders all abreast, then everybody can reflect back once it's cured, let's say, and say, right, what would we do again? Accountability's there, consultation's there, everybody's fully informed and knows what to do next. So, and I think the final thing I would say is that, you know, you also, to determine whether the issue that is, or the incident rather, you know, determine whether your brand, is that within or your brand parameters maybe, or is it a business critical situation, in which case it's likely to escalate and have that adverse effect on your own brand and your brand reputation.
Right. Chris, as you mentioned, brand safety is such a broad topic to govern or to manage. I think the elephant metaphor should be, we should be talking about the elephant in the living room. If we don't do that, the activist groups will be pushing us, or the consumers will be pushing us to talk about it in a very harsh way. So what about the future of brand safety? What's next for the brand safety? What should marketers be aware of going forward? What are some main trends that we should be taking care of?
Yeah, great, and well done for getting the elephant metaphor in. I was struggling on that one. So well, let me answer that. Sort of the short summary answer is, I think there's a number, but three that I'm going to mention today. One is a trend around data and privacy. Another one is about brand safety in mobile, in-app and OTT, over-the-top TV sort of content. And then the third is increased attention, let's say, on influencer content, fake influencers, and the like. And it's not necessarily in this particular order, but just the three that I'll reference. I'll reference briefly. So data and privacy. I mean, the concern consumers have about data and privacy and security is only going to grow, and it's never going to go away. So therefore, being that whilst it's a trend, it's going to be a continuing trend, and being on top of that, mindful of that, understanding that becomes crucial, and especially within certainly the media supply chain, tech vendors, agencies, platforms, publishers as well. You know, understanding how they use their data or your data, understanding their own data security, privacy, and thresholds is important. I think also it represents a bit of a risk that data and privacy is only going to get greater regulation, and therefore I would urge marketers to be sort of at that table, be involved around those areas, and be aware of what's coming down the line. And again, not just one individual, but a group of stakeholders, as I said before. In terms of brand safety, in another trend, brand safety, mobile, in-app, I said, and OTT content. Brand safety stewards, experts, marketers are going to turn their attention to this. There's more and more content, mobile streaming video content. They're all going to be sort of vulnerable to potential breaches, and I suspect there may well be some standards coming in around there. And again, among standards, being involved in setting those standards, or with their agencies and partners and associations becomes key. And the third one I mentioned was around influencers and social media platforms and the growth that's happening there. Marketers associate with influencers for a reason, and that can work really, really well for them. And therefore, maintaining that relationship and the content, and being clear about what's on side, what's on brand, as it were, and what isn't. But we are in a world where, unfortunately, sometimes either by mistake, there are sometimes repercussions for the brand reputation if an influencer's relationship or their content can inadvertently become tainted. And we're also in a world, unfortunately, where there are fake influencers and fake reviews, fake attacks on brands and the like. And I think, again, coming back to the marketer, coming back to the internal stakeholders, coming back to external stakeholders that are involved in that, everybody's got to be aware that the possibility of these things happening, have the plan that I've said before, have the strategy that I've been hopefully articulating today, and have the measures in place and the action plan that can be put into place, and then review it and keep learning, and keep implementing. So they're the three: data and privacy, mobile in-app, and OTT content, as well as influencers as well. And if I say, just to maybe round this off a bit just for a second, is that actually brand safety is not a sort of set it and forget it, which is hopefully I've been outlining today. And even when the brand safety strategy is in place, keeping abreast of these changing trends, and having a plan for having an engagement, and then having a plan for dealing with them, being more active than reactive, is only going to help the reputation and the rub off of the reputation of your brand with consumers and their trust levels, which is what I mentioned before.
Thank you very much, Chris. I think this is a very crucial point. I really like the three pillars that you have introduced. And I think GARM's mission, in order to realize these three approaches, is also crucial. As we are moving to our final round, ladies and gentlemen of the audience, I think this is your last chance to drop any questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to share it from our Q&A tab, and I'll be asking those questions to our panelists if we have enough time left at the end of the session. So, Rob, as you have mentioned, GARM is working on some kind of strategies and tools and platforms in order to create much more safer environment in the digital media. So just tell us a little bit more about these strategies and tools. What weapons are you preparing for your arsenal in GARM?
So the main thing here is making sure that we are developing solutions that are fit for purpose. So at the global level is almost creating this infrastructure, and that is, you know, part of the things that we talked about in terms of the solutions. You know, that you actually have the controls, that you can start building this in. So it's, you know, it's one thing to say every brand should have a brand safety strategy. It's, you know, these are the definitions are meant to feed into some of those workshops that Chris was talking about, that we've all seen as best practices. So you're able to say, okay, for my brand, here's where I want to show up. And then this can then actually go into the agency and be part of the planning process. And at the platform, and then the targeting company would then have the means to actually then link up the solution, the strategy, with the actual planning and buying, as well as reporting. So now you actually created this system where definitions, a workshop, a buying standard, a reporting standard, a targeting tool, they all actually work together. So that is what we're that is basically tools that are available now. So most recently we've seen Zephyr, Pixability, Peer 39. They're actively taking our definitions, and they are in the market now today. We have Double Verify, IAS, Moat, and others about to deploy those definitions. The platforms themselves: YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Snap, Twitch, Pinterest. They are all actively integrating the solutions into their planning and buying tools, to a little bit of a varying degree, because depending on the way that they are able to format the buying as well as the reporting, it depends, is that these are all going to be in place. So the most important sort of, you know, the weapon in the arsenal, it's imminent, and it's ready for the brands to use. The nice thing about that also is, by working with the independent verification companies, is that this will now start to feed into actual campaign reporting. So that ability to sort of measure compliance measuring compliance on your agency, measuring compliance on the platform, to actually make sure that, okay, I was a brand and I wanted my ad to show up here. I asked the agency to do it. Did it actually happen in real life? That is going to be that is the important other arsenal, because what we want to do is drive that idea of accountability. The other weapon, sort of, to drive forward, is this idea of the independent oversight, which again is, it's a weapon that's always on, in essence. And really what we want to make sure there is that the brands that come into GARM the platforms that come into GARM have a plan to actually drive transparency. So this is something that we're driving as an always on strategy, and making sure that we drive that level of transparency. The other things that we're going to be looking into are things like misinformation, making sure that there's a clear understanding there, education, because what Chris talked about is, like, there are a lot of people who are involved in these discussions. We are developing research and resource materials for media leaders, for CMOs, for marketing directors, because really what we want to make sure is that it's this all-in, always-on approach is equally understood.
Great, Rob. Besides that, as you have mentioned, there are some platforms, there are some strategies, and there are some tools in use, and we will be expecting more to come. But the localization is a very important issue. Every market has its own dynamics, and every market has its own rules. So how will the standardization and localization process will be executed, if I may say? What roles do local bodies and platforms play for an effective localization?
Absolutely, that's a wonderful question, and it's the perfect question to be asking, because what we part of the WFA, the beauty of it is that we bring in the National Advertisers Associations in the many markets that we operate in, and the invitation there is that we start to work together to adapt those definitions and build upon them. So you almost have to think about it as like global. What we've defined is almost the bedrock, the base of the pyramid. What we want to do is see the local markets build on top of that. So we understand that the brand safety as well as the suitability, the way that it would be executed in, say, the US versus the UK versus Saudi or Turkey would look different. So that is absolutely the opportunity for the National Advertisers Associations is to take those definitions and to, first and foremost, is translate them. Second is to make sure that those independent providers are activating it in the language locally. And then the third element on it is to make sure that those local cultural sensitivities are brought into place in a way that allows for the domestic brands, the domestic platform, the operations of the platforms to operate in a way that is appropriate to the market. Because at the end of the day, we've done the hard work at defining safety at a global level. The invitation here at the local level is to help shape what is suitable, which is very different.
Thank you, Rob. And let's shift to Chris. Chris, we have talked a lot about brand safety, but also there is the concept of brand responsibility. So when thinking those two terms together, brand responsibility and brand safety, what picture do you see? Why are these two terms are important and interconnected?
Yeah, great question. And I think the nature of brand safety conversation is changing. There's some subtly and perceptibly towards this notion of brand responsibility. I mean, they are conjoined, they are together. Increasingly, marketers will need to be attuned to brand responsibility and align their brand values, company values, the brand values, with their role in advocating for and against, or even participating in, larger societal issues. And brands want to be, I think Rob mentioned, environmental issues, for example. Brands maybe, do want to be involved in that. They're being cleaner, using less plastic, whatever it might be that they're deciding to do. So their actions and their brand values and their actions need to align. And I think we've seen that in COVID. Companies that have had all these brand values, that if they've aligned them to the actions in how they've looked after their staff and customers and the like, they've generally fared better than when there's a miss sort of not miscommunication, when they're maybe not necessarily aligned. And so this brand responsibility becomes hugely important. And just to maybe put a reference point on that, aligning brand responsibility and values with actions leads to greater brand trust. And as I said earlier, brand trust, or consumers' trust in brands, is hugely important. And the reference point I was going to make is that work we've done with the University of Oxford, the Said Business School, around brand safety, which we're going to at the MMA again launch very shortly. It shows that building brand trust is the single best way to protect a brand from a safety crisis, as the trust is a sort of insulator against that unsafe content. It's like giving the benefit of the doubt, maybe an easy way to put it. So therefore, any brand strategies that do generate greater consumer trust will always be smarter and more strategic. So brand responsibility, aligning to brand values, company values, and to actions, creates trust. Trust therefore enables consumers to continue to believe and gives them, let's say, wiggle room with their view and insulates them if something were to happen, an incident around unsafe content. So it's quite a short answer, as I'm conscious of time, but that's how we see the two aligning.
Chris, last but not least, as we are approaching the end of the session, I would like to ask for any insights or any research around the customer attitudes to brand safety. According to consumer perspective, where do they see the responsibilities for those failings lying? Mm-hmm. Is it the brand marketer or media agency or the platform? Who's to blame?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it comes from the research I just referenced in terms of University of Oxford. So, briefly, what happened in this sort of research is that a series of experiments were run showing brand advertising, a made-up brand, because no brand's going to put their advertising against an unsafe sort of piece of content. And then we asked consumers about their, what it meant and their views. So, consumers maybe saw a made-up brand ad next to unsafe content, and then for a control, it was against sort of safe content, and it did lower their perception, their evaluations of the brand across a number of different dimensions, whether it's even the perceived quality of the brand, they don't like it anymore, whether they would want to associate with it or purchase with it, and when this happens, consumers almost instantly sort of make some connection, whether it's conscious or unconscious, and therefore this, as I've said before, would start to maybe erode some brand trust. However, I think a key thing we found in the research is that actually it does also this alignment between advertising and unsafe content goes to what I said before. There is some tolerance that different brands have against what would or wouldn't be deemed unsafe within their businesses. But actually, some brands would. It depends on the individual consumer's sort of characteristics, or in terms of what their perception was around that content. And maybe to make this a bit more live, what they said in the research is that there were instances where individual consumers' characteristics either strengthened or weakened the severity of the effects of being adjacent to unsafe content. So a way we looked at this, and what came out is that if you see content, those who saw content about children vaping had a stronger adverse impact on brand attitudes and purchase motivations if those seeing it were non-smokers. But if you were smokers, if someone was a smokers, then the rub-off around the vaping and advertising to that was nowhere near as sharp. And the same thing happens with parents versus non-parents. So there are some characteristics there that I think are important and need to be put together. And then my final point, just to answer this one, is that I think that does enable an opportunity. It enables a brand and its agencies, creative and media agencies, to actually use ads strategically to build trust with consumers, where they can create ads that acknowledge, say, the current environment in an authentic and culturally appropriate way. And authenticism is huge, because if it's fake, it's gonna backfire on you. So using ads in that way that reinforces your brand responsibility, the trustworthiness, is hugely important. I think making that into the creative build, the creative briefing system, is as important as the brand logo and various other things. So that can offer as a sort of small buffer against some of that content. So yeah, that's where we're at.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Rob. I think this is all for our panel rounds. We have a couple of questions from the audience. I really appreciate if you can keep it as brief, as short as possible, because I don't want to keep people a lot more throughout this session. So here are a couple of questions from the audience, gentlemen. The first one, I'm trying to merge a couple of questions to a single one, because it's all about the brand safety guidelines. Creating all markets, all brands guideline for brand safety. Is it possible, or it's a myth? I think the question is trying to address if we can have a single guideline for all the brands and all the markets, or it should be different for different brands and markets. Chris, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I think, well, yes, indeed. We've attempted and are going to publish a brand safety strategy guide for marketers, and it's not broken down by type of brand or sector necessarily, because I think there are some guiding principles. Bringing internal, external stakeholders together, having accountability, having a plan becomes hugely important. And I think, as I said earlier, different brands have maybe different tolerances. Regulated finance may be very different to more FMCG type brands. So I think you can localize, whether by geography or by brand type, within this overarching strategy guide, within the overarching principles, because having a plan, sticking to it, reviewing it, putting it in processes, working with trade associations, is going to keep your brand safe, irrespective of your sector.
Great. Another question is about the audit companies. Should audit companies be involved in ad fraud detection? Who would like to take that, Rob?
I think that they should be involved in the implementation. I think one of the big things that we need to make sure of is that as you look at these challenges as ecosystem challenges, you need to understand that the ecosystem challenges actually need to bring forward the right accountabilities, checks and balances amongst different players. So what you would want is an ad tech player to do the detection, but you want an independent verification company to make sure that the access to the platforms by that independent verification company is working appropriately. So I would actually say that so let me reframe the question. Should independent verification companies, should auditors have a role in the detection of fraud? Yes, but they need to make sure that it is for the access to the data in order to do their role properly. So it's a yes, but to answer the question, which is probably the way that I would look at that, is that yes, you would want an auditor to have some role, but their role is to make sure that the independent verification company is getting access to the data and being able to categorize it appropriately, and that the way that they are manufacturing their product or their service, that the intent matches the output, and that is really the beauty of it.
Right. Last but not least, as we have seen, there is a huge change in roles and responsibilities of marketers and brand managers, if I may say, in particular. What kind of new skills and abilities should these people apply in order to comply with or complement with these new requirements? Gentlemen.
So I'll go first. So I think that if anything, what we've seen is that this idea of managing sort of your brand vision and being able to bring it into matching vision as well as behaviors is critical. So I think what you're seeing is that the marketing leader of the future needs to be able to play in what I would say is the boardroom and the engine room. The boardroom and being able to have these very broad strategic conversations around what does my organization believe? And then being able to then go into the engine room and then being able to determine, how do I work with my agency? How do I work with ad tech? What does this data actually mean? So it requires a really broad sense of boardroom and engine room.
Rob, Chris, thank you very much for being with us today and sharing your insights and perspectives on such an important topic. I appreciate, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Serdar, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Teşekkürler.
Great. Sevgili dostlar, değerli izleyiciler, böylelikle bugünkü etkinliğimizin sonuna geldik.
Dear audience, this marks the end of our important event. As a important media company and content creator, we looked at the issues concerning the transformation of digital marketing. And here we saw that CARM fills an important void whereby different stakeholders come together under an umbrella while also creating standards in a localized way and exchange opinions for common agreement. So this means an important step in terms of addressing the important issues in the industry. We believe that the whole industry will benefit from that together with all other stakeholders. We would like to thank our dear audience for their kind participation. My apologies for not being able to address a few more questions. I will forward them to Chris and Rob later on. If they consider appropriate, they may address them later, but that will be all from our side. Thank you very much. Stay safe. Bye-bye.